Are you looking to make a nice baptismal dress, but you're not sure how to go about it? Then come along with me and I'll show you how to make it from scratch. Let's go. Hey guys, Musa here from Quantum Home Improvements and Solutions. Welcome back. If this is your first time to our channel, it's great having you join us. And so today I'm going to show you how to make a baptismal dress from scratch. And so if you're struggling to find a pattern, which most people do, I'm going to show you how to make your own. And so there's two ways. Either you can use a basic block, which I've got here, and I've had this since 1985-86 when I did my dressmaking course, but this one here is a size 12 for women, and it's not going to work. But the other way is by making a pattern using an existing garment. And so what you've got to do is just have a look at the illustration, the picture that you've got, and just take a few things into consideration, like the bodice height, the skirt length, the sleeve length, the neckline, any gathering. And so there's a few things involved. It might sound a bit daunting, but in actual fact, it's quite easy, and I'll walk you through that step by step. And so 2 years ago, our son and his wife had a baby girl, and they asked me if I can make the baptismal dress, which is a total honor. But when I went to make the video, unfortunately, there was a corruption between the camera and the gimbal, and I lost a lot of footage. And I wasn't able to release that video in the way I wanted it to. Plus also, I used the wrong pencil. I used a HB 0.5, which didn't illustrate very well on camera. But thank God, our son and his wife had another baby girl, and so I'm going to do this again. But this time I'm going to use a 2B pencil, 0.7 thick, which should illustrate better. So now I'll get into it and I'll show you how to do the pattern making and the dress. Okay, so now we've got our pattern making paper down. I've taken off all the measurements that I need from this onesie, this jumpsuit, and so I'm going to work off this. I've got the complete measurements and then the half measurements and the quarter measurements. So when you're pattern making, you need half and quarter measurements as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is start with the center back. So I'm going to do the bodice. So I've come down, measured from the back, the lower back neck, down 14 centimeters. I've estimated that that's roughly where the bodice comes to, so roughly about 14 centimeters from the lower neck of the back. And on the front, I've measured it to come down 11 centimeters. Now, these measurements are only just rough. As I'm pattern making, I'll find out whether I need to make adjustments or not. All right, so now I'm going to start with the center back. And I'm going to use the 2B pencil. So the blue one is 2B, this one here is HB, just in case I need it. Now when you are pattern making, you do need to have a rubber with you because you will make mistakes. All right, so I'm just going to start from the edge here. I'm going to make the center back first. And so I'm just going to line my ruler at 90 degree here. This is a pattern making ruler to the edge 90 degree. And I'm going to rule a line to the right. All right, so now that line will represent the lower neck line. And so now the chest width, I've got 48 centimeters total going off this garment. The waist is actually 46 centimeters. But what I'm gonna do is work off those measurements. So if I've got 48, I'm going to divide this garment in exact half between the front and the back. Usually with men's or women's bodice or shirts, they're not exactly half, but I will do it here in this case, and that's how this onesie has been made. But on the side here, for the center back, we're going to have a zipper. So I'm going to allow, before I even start, 1.5 centimeters for the zipper. From the lower back neckline down to the waist, I've measured 14 centimeters. So I'm just going to rule that in now. And I'll also put it across here, and I'm going to rule another line. Now the reason I'm going so wide, because I'm doing both front and back. All right, so I'm going to make the back on the left and then the front on the right. As I said, the back has 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. I am going to rule that in now so I don't forget. Okay, and so now I've measured the width of the neck between the shoulders at 11 centimeters, between here and here. I'm going to go across as a half measurement, 5.5. Remembering that you've got two sides of the back because there's going to be a zipper. All right, so now from that point on, I want to reach the shoulder height. Now the shoulder height on this garment shows at around 1.5 centimeters. So I'm just going to go up 1.5. And just rule that up. And from that, I'm going to curve a line. This is where the stitching line, I haven't allowed seam allowance yet. All right, so now the width of the shoulder, I've measured it at 5 centimeters. So if you look at the drawing, a lot of these are just estimates. The shoulder width here is 5 centimeters I've estimated, and I'm also going to make here 5 centimeters between the waist and the lower armhole. Okay, so now I'm just going to measure across here 5 centimeters. So when the 5 hits the line right there, that's my mark, and I'll rule that in. That is actually with the seam. The chest width I've got here is 48 centimeters. Now the half measurement is 24, but because we're putting a zipper down the back, once again, I'm going to make that into a quarter measurement, which is actual fact 12. So 12 is there. Okay, once again, going off the garment, the height of the armhole is, I've estimated 9 centimeters between this point and this point here. So I'm just going to measure down 9 centimeters, which is there. I'll just take that across here as well, superimpose that measurement. All right, I'll rule that across. All right, so now we know that the chest width is 48 centimeters and a quarter measurement, because we're making a quarter piece here, is 12. I'll just mark that there. Okay, so now the waist is 46 centimeters. I've measured that a little bit smaller than the chest. And the quarter measurement for that is 11.5 centimeters. So I'll just mark that in there. I can now rule that in. Now this is the stitch line, so I'll put the mark as a stitch line. Now, from the shoulder, I'm going to make a mark, just a small little line, 90 degree coming off that shoulder. So now I can make the armhole. Now the armhole is just freehand drawn in. What I've got to do is just a very subtle curve here. On the front, it always has a subtle curve on the armholes. Okay, and so that's it there. And now what we do here, we put a little notch. So when we're sewing, we want to put a notch. We know where the sleeve's going to start from. So I'm going to go at 3 centimeters, just right there. I'm going to put a notch. Now, because it's the back, I'm going to put a second notch. Back always has a second notch when you do an armhole. So I'm going to put 2 notches in. The front will only have 1. Now, usually the back has actually more of a curve, but because this is a baby garment, I'm going to do the front and back armhole very, very similar. All I've got to do now is just put the seam allowance everywhere. I'm going to add 1.5 centimeters everywhere and just rule that in. Around the armhole, I'll just do that the best I can freehand. Okay, that's it there. Do the side seams. I'll do the waist. I'm going to do this on both sides because it's the exact same. So it is faster to do 2 patterns in one go. Okay, this has turned out really good. I'm very happy with this. So now I'm just going to run the ruler to the seam allowance there, and I'm going to draw another line, just a line like that. And I'm going to put an arrow. Okay, now that is the grain line. Okay, so when you're putting a grain line in, it's usually to the center back or the center front. Okay, so that's in, and I'm just going to put here, baptismal dress, cut 2, because we've got 2 pieces, but also we're going to make a lining for the bodice. So I'm going to put here, lining, cut 2. Okay, so we're going to use this pattern for both the lining and also for the satin fabric. So now I'll do the front bodice. I know that it's a full piece. It does not have a seam. It has a fold only. I'm just going to measure across on the chest measurement, on the chest line, 12 centimeters. On the waist, 11.5 centimeters. So again, that's our seam line, and we'll add seam allowance in a minute. And so once again, the neckline, we're going to come across 5.5 centimeters. We're going to go up again, 1.5 for the height of the shoulder, and we're going to come across till it hits 5 again on the line, and there we are there. And then just do again the 90 off the shoulder. All right, now I just come across and just marry that up, pretty much the same as the back. Now I'm going to, again, 3 centimeters, I'm going to come up, and this is where the armhole is going to be. Now, as I said, the front will only have 1 notch, the back will have 2 notches. The front neck line is lower than the back. Okay, so we're going to come down 3 centimeters and we're going to curve that in just by hand. So I'm just going to make sure that that little bit there is actually 90 degree. Let's try to start off with a 90 degree. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, so now I'm just gonna rule a line, top and bottom, put a line, and I'm gonna put an arrow here, like this. Now what that represents, when an arrow hits a line there, it means that's a fold line, okay? And we just write here, CF, center front, fold. Okay, so when we're cutting the fabric, we need to put it on the fold line, so when it's cut, it opens up to a double piece. All right, all we're gonna do now is put the seam allowance in. All right, that's done. Beautiful. Now I've spaced them out a fair amount so you can see what I'm doing. Usually I would put them right up next to each other. So all I've got to do now is just cut these out. Now when you do cut, you use paper scissors. Never use fabric scissors on paper. Okay, so they're done. Now, if I put them against each other, taking out the seam allowance, which is 1.5 on the back, you'll see that these patterns will actually line up pretty closely, and that's pretty good. One thing I forgot to do is to write down what this piece is. So it's a baptismal dress, front, bodice, cut 1. It's on fold. And lining, cut 1. All right, so now we'll get straight into doing the skirt. The skirt is actually very easy in this case here. Now, going by the picture, it shows that they're using a lace. Now, I did buy the lace, but the lace is a little complicated. Usually I like to put a bit of a fan on a dress. What I'm gonna do here, the waist is 46 centimeters. I'm actually gonna make the pattern of the skirt double that size, and then I'm gonna gather it together to give it that look of the curve, okay? And if you're wondering where I got this pattern making paper from, I did get it online. All right, so now I'm just gonna rule a brand new line here, because this paper has not been cut properly. It came on a large piece and I've just cut it off. So I'll just rule a line. Okay, so now the skirt height, I've estimated to be roughly 40 centimeters long, but the lace itself is gonna be the exact same pattern, but it's gonna be an extra 15 centimeters longer. Okay, so now I'll just put a seam allowance on this left side. Come down 40 centimeters plus seam allowance, so that's 43. So it's there. Just put a seam allowance line there. Okay, and I'll come down 43 here. Oops. You really do need a rubber when you're pattern making. All right, and just put another one here. So again, 43, 1.5, 1.5. All right, so I'll just rule that up. Okay, so the waist is 46 centimeters. I'm gonna double that, which is 92. But in actual fact, I might just round off to a 95. So I'll just measure that out. Okay, now, I'm just gonna put a grain line. The grain line pretty much is just parallel to the side here. So the grain line will just be, again, a straight line parallel to the seam allowance, and just put it here. Skirt, cut 1, and lace, cut 1, plus extend 15 centimeters. Okay, just to remind me. All right, now I'll just cut that out. So when you are cutting, a good habit to get into is to do long cuts, because it is more accurate. And there we go. So you can see how big this is. So for a baby's baptismal dress, that's pretty wide. All right, so I'll put that on the side. Okay, so now the only piece we need to make is the sleeve. Now the sleeve is actually quite easy, believe it or not. Now the measurements, we always got to go off these measurements. And now the sleeve, I've measured, so it's 9 centimeters down from the shoulder line to the bottom of the armhole. Now there is a curve in there, so you've got to add extra. So if it's 18 centimeters in width, you've probably got to make it an extra probably 3 or 4 centimeters. Now we will measure that off and we'll correct it in a minute. What I'm going to do is just rule a line anywhere on here, it doesn't really matter, just rule a big line. And so what I'm going to do now, just start it from one point. I'm going to measure across 18 centimeters, and the halfway point is 9. So I've measured from the bottom of the armhole to the wrist, 14 centimeters. Okay, there, 14. There's 14. Now this is without seam allowance at this point. And I could alter this pattern. I'm just going to just draw it up first. Now I'm going to go 90 degree off the center there to maintain a center line. And so that can become our grain line. Usually sleeves come down on an angle. They taper down to the cuff. You've got to remember that baby's got to get their hands through. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make it parallel, just going to make it straight. And so if you look at the picture, it does not taper. It actually looks fairly consistent. So now the height of the sleeve, I'm going to make it 5 centimeters. So the height meaning this section here is going to be 5 centimeters. So traditionally speaking, when you're making sleeves, the back is on the left side and it's usually got a bigger dip than the front. So I'm just going to make a dip here. I'm just going to curve that around and just put a bit of a dip there. Okay. Now this is a stitch line, even though I haven't drawn it as that. Now this one here, I'm just going to make it a bit more straighter. It's a slight bit of curve, but not as much. You can see a bigger curve there. So now you got to get your tape measure out and you've got to measure the distance around, both on the pattern and on the sleeve. So I'll bring back these patterns now. I'm going to measure the sleeves off. So we go there. Okay, so that is 10 centimeters. This should actually be the same. Yep. It's 10 centimeters. All right, great. So you've got here 18, but going by the armhole, it's 20. So now what we're going to do is make it a little bit bigger than 20. 20 is a bit tight to try to squeeze it into the armhole. You need a bit of ease. So I might make it 21 or 22. So I'll just measure this off first and see where I come to, and to see if I need to make that make any adjustments to the sleeve. Okay, so I measure it right around. And there we go, it's sitting at 21. So it is actually really good. That 1 centimeter is going to give me enough ease to get into that armhole. So we're going to call this Baptismal Dress Sleeve Cut 2 and also Cut Lace 2. Okay, so that's done. Now just got to put seam allowance to the top. There we go. Oh, that's done. Now remember, on the left side, is the back. So we're going to measure out the 3 centimeters as we did on the bodice and then an extra 1. So the notching will be just there. Now on the right side is the front and we're just going to put 1 single notch. All right, so that's done. I'll just cut that out and it's done. All right, the next stage now is to cut the fabric out and then we'll start sewing. So now I've laid out the satin fabric. This is a stretch satin fabric, which I got from AW Fabrics in St. Mary's. The first thing I'm gonna do is the skirt. Okay, so this is just one piece, and all I'm gonna do is just place the pins on. Now when I do that, I just carefully lift the fabric up just marginally so I don't distort the fabric too much. So you've got to be careful to sit that pattern on pretty straight. Now try not to put too many pins, but you've got to put enough so it doesn't move. And once again, the grain line is there and it's parallel to the sides. So that's done. So now I'm going to cut it out with dressmaking scissors. Now these scissors should only ever be used for cutting fabric, never to cut paper. Now satin fabric is a difficult fabric to work with. So the skirt is now cut out. I will put that on the side. Now, you can see this side here has a lot more fabric than this side. So what I'm going to do is double this one up on itself, like that. There we go. All right, so now I'll grab the sleeve. Now because I've doubled the fabric up, I can cut 2 sleeves at one go. So I'll put the pins in that. Okay, so that's that piece. Now, we've got the bodice. Now we've got this one here, which is on fold. Now, even though the pattern is this way, I'm gonna turn it upside down because the fold line is just here. So I'm just gonna place that on. Okay, so now this is the back. Remembering that the back has a seam allowance, so there's no fold line in this. There's no room to put it there, so I'm just gonna place it basically just right there. Remembering that the grain line is parallel to the sides. So just make sure that the grain line looks pretty straight. Sometimes if it's a big pattern, if you're not making a small garment but a bigger garment, you do need to measure out and just make sure that the grain line is fairly straight. If you don't put it on the grain line, it's on a slight angle, you'll find that some of these sides that have not been pattern made that way will stretch, and so it won't fit they won't come together properly. Now I'll cut these out. Okay, so they're all cut. I have got some leftover fabric from the last baptismal dress from our granddaughter. And so I'm gonna use this as the lining. And this is a cotton fabric, which will be a lot nicer for her to wear. So what I'm gonna do here is double this one up just on this side. Get the sleeve in there, that'll fit beautifully. And also the back will fit in here beautifully. So that's really good. So I'm going to work with that, make sure that still has a grain line. Even though I don't have the side here to measure off, I can actually see the grain in the fabric, and I just go 90 degree to that grain. So I can actually see that it's still on the grain line. All right. So now instead of repinning, I'm just going to use the exact same pins. So now I'm just going to fold this section up here, on fold, remembering that the front bodice is on fold. Done, beautiful, plenty of fabric. So now I'll just cut this one out. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to cut, which is the last thing, which is the lace. And this is the only lace I could find that would suit this design close enough. So it had a few marks in it, but the store owner gave me a little bit more fabric to cut around. So this is the actual look of the lace. It's quite nice. The only thing is that it's got flowers in here, and the flowers are riveted on with these little pearls. I tried taking them off with a pair of pliers, but it was actually damaging the lace. It's very fine. So now I'm going to go back to the skirt. I'm going to place the skirt on here. Okay, so what I'm going to do basically is stop the pattern at that point there. I don't want any of that into the skirt because we've got enough pattern here. So I'll just put it at the highest point. So I won't be able to marry up the design of these lace, but that will be in the back, so you won't notice it so easily. And as you can see here, I've allowed a little bit more length in the skirt. I'm going to make the lace longer. So if you measure from the seam allowance down, it should be close to 15 centimeters. I'm just going to double check that. Beautiful. That's actually right on 15. All right, so the skirt is cut out. And I've got this piece here. Hopefully it's the right size. I'm just going to overlap it and make sure that these bottom line up. So now what I'm going to do is just place the sleeve on there. And so I'm going to also let the lace come down a little further past the cuffs. This has a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. I'm just going to let it flare out a little bit. All right, so now I'll just cut the sleeves out. All right, so that's cut out. And as you can see, the bottom of the lace goes past the actual fabric, and that fabric will go up 1.5, so that'll be the extra that hangs past the cuff. So now I'll cut out the lace for the bodice, front and back. Now what I've done here is just put the fold line there. You can see the fold on the lace, and I've sort of just followed that pattern of the lace, making it parallel as best I can. Remember that the lace is coming to one side, so one will go one way, one will go the other. So what I'm doing here is placing it roughly in between, so when it finishes, it'll look on both sides. It's the happy medium I think I'm going to get. And so at the back, I'm going to line it up as well at the same level. All right, so now I'll just cut them out. So now one thing I'm going to do is locate where those little notches are. So remember the 3 centimeter notch, this is on the front. I'll just do it in the lacing and also the front there. So you've got to notch that out. So you can see the notches here on the sleeve. There's the front, there's the back. So I'm going to notch them out. So when I'm notching, I just, the seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters. I'm just going to notch in around about probably just over 5 mil, so half a centimeter. Okay, it's all done. Okay, so now it's time to construct the garment. There's a number of different ways you can go about it. I'm going to choose a fairly simple way, but a thorough way. All right, so what I'll do is start with the sleeves, just take all the pins out. Now remembering the double notch is the back, the single notch is the front, so you'll know which side is which. All right, so now the first step I'm going to do is grab the actual satin fabric, and I'm going to grab one lining. Now remember, you stitch on the good side. So I'll turn that around. Okay, single notch to single notch there, so I know that's the right way around. All right, so now 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to back tack. So what I'm doing here is sewing the hem, the cuff of the sleeves, sewing the lining and the satin fabric together. So you'll see in a sec what I'm doing. So again, the right side to the right side. Now some fabrics like this cotton, both sides are the right side, but the satin definitely has a right side. So you need to see the shiny side is usually the right side. Okay, so now I've stitched both of them and I'm gonna iron this down. Okay, so now whenever you're ironing, make sure that you've got the settings on the right setting. Now, satin fabric does melt very quickly, it burns very quickly, so you've got to put it on the low setting, either nylon or silk. Just touch the fabric gently and just make sure it doesn't burn, which is fine. So now all I do is just pull that and I'm ironing the seam allowance to one direction. Okay, now once I've done that, I then turn the lining. Okay, that is beautiful. So now I'm going to stitch this whole fabric together as one piece before I go any further. But before I do that, I'm just going to pin this in place, make it a bit easier to stabilize the fabric. So what I'm going to do here is basically just stitch it about 1 centimeter in. I'm not going to go 1.5. This is just basically to keep it in place. Just be careful when you're sewing over pins that you don't hit the pin with the needle because it will shatter and it can actually go in your eye. Just be careful with that. So now stitching these all together is just going to make life so much easier. Now when you're sewing around a curve, make sure you get your fingers in and turn your hand like that. There we go. Back tack that. So that's done. I'm just going to take all the pins out. So now we're going to start on the bodice. We'll take the pins out of the bodice and you can identify between the front and back easily because the back is 2 pieces, the front is only 1 piece. It also has a different neckline and we have the single and double notch. So there's a whole heap of indicators to tell you which is front and which is back. So what I'm going to do now is just get the lining and connect them all together. And the only parts I'm going to connect at this point are the shoulders. So to do that, you place the back bodice to the front, remembering that the sleeves go together. So that's the sleeve section, this is the sleeve section. All I'm going to do is stitch the shoulder line, that's all. And that married up beautifully. Okay, so that's how it looks like. This top section is upside down, it's the front bodice, and then the others are the back, the 2 small ones. I do have a label that is registered called CC, and I'm going to stitch that on now, and all I do is just top stitch it on. Okay, there we go, beautiful. Okay, so now I'm going to do the exact same for the front, so for the satin fabric. So remember I put the right sides together, you can see that's shiny, this side is not shiny, so you put the 2 shiny sides together, the right sides together. Okay, so that's done. Now I'm just going to sew the lace together. Now remember the lace has got a right side as well, and it's the sides with the flowers on them. Okay, so again, that's the right side, that's the wrong side. Okay, armhole to armhole. So now just with the lace, I don't want it to stick out too much from the top side. So I'm actually going to trim that back about half its width. Just do that on both shoulders. Now I'll just iron open the seams. Okay, so this being cotton is going to be very creased. I'm just going to take the opportunity right now to iron everything open and iron out any creases. I have not got this on very hot at all. Okay, so now I've got the lace. It's on top of the satin, the bodice. I'm just going to put pins all the way around. So now I'm going to stitch that down like I did for the sleeves. Just coming around the neckline. There we go, and just go back down just a little, just to sort of do a bit of a back tack. Okay. Take all these pins out. Okay, so just one thing to be mindful of when you are stitching lace onto any kind of fabric, especially satin, it wants to slide around a bit, it wants to move. So you just got to find the best position. That's why I put a lot of pins in it, to slow down or to stop some of that movement. And I'm happy with it. You'll find the lace will float over a little bit. It's not a big deal. It's still sitting flat on the fabric, and I'm happy about that. All right, good. So now I'm going to place the lining on top like that. Now the only thing I'm going to sew on here is the neckline, only the neckline at 1.5 centimeters. I'm going to make sure I'm going to ignore the lace, and I'm going to stitch only the satin and the lining. So first I'll line up all the seam allowance. Again, I'm going to put pins in here. I don't usually, but I will be, just to line everything up properly. So when I put a pin in, this is on the seam allowance of the shoulders. I'll put it right on the join. I'm going to have a look on the other side and see where that landed to see if it's landed properly on the other one, and it has, so that's fine. So now I want to go nicely around that neckline, and I want to make sure it has nice contours because this is going to be very visible. Nice curves. Okay, that's sewing nicely. Make sure my seam allowance underneath goes the right way. And just finish that off. Beautiful. Now, I'll take these pins out. Just make sure how they lined up. That is spot on there. Hopefully the other side is the same. Spot on there, very happy with that. Okay, so now we need to turn the lining to the inside. We're not going to be able to do that unless we do some notching. So this is where you've got to be very, very careful. If you haven't done this before, take your time. All right, so what we're going to do is just notch into this, just little notches. Okay, don't go all the way to the stitching line. Now where it's a hard curve, you have to put a couple of extra notches in. Okay, so I've jumped the gun a little bit. Not a big deal. What I usually do is trim back the lining, just the seam allowance to half. And we can actually trim back, while we're here, the lace. And you only want to cut the lining, not the satin. So what we're trying to do is to reduce the bulk. So basically just cutting that seam allowance down to about half. So now you'll see how I'm doing it. There we go. All right, that's a bit easier. Now I'll go back to notching. So now I'll just notch it out like that. Make sure you do not hit that stitch line because it will start fraying. So that's notched through. So now I'm going to iron that down. So what I'm choosing to do here, you probably notice that I'm ironing on the lining side. Because it is cotton, it will not burn as easy. All right, so now I'm going to stitch everything together. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch the sleeves onto the bodice, but before I do that, I'm going to overlock both the side seams, so then I don't have to overlock later, and it means that the lace will be finished off. Okay, so now, because I've stitched around the armhole, I'm just going to notch this, remembering that this notch here, the single notch, is for the sleeve, but I'm just going to give it a couple more notches to make this straight, to make it easier to sew. So now again, the first notch, the single notch is on the front bodice, and the single notch on the sleeve is just here. So I'm going to place this here and just stitch that around. Just take your time when you're doing sleeves, because you've got to put two different curves into each other. So you will have to continue to adjust the actual sleeve as it goes into the armhole. Beautiful. Okay, so now this is the double notch this side. So I'll make sure, yeah, I've got a double notch this side. And there we go. Okay, that's stitched in beautifully. Very happy with that. Okay, so now I'm going to overlock the top of the sleeve. So make sure when you do overlock the sleeves, you push your fabric inside because you very easily can cut it like this accidentally, so be really careful with that. So make sure all the fabric goes to the back. So one thing I should have done actually was the side seam as well. I forgot all about it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is top stitch from underneath the sleeve this elastic. It's only a very small, thin elastic, and it won't bother the baby. So what I'm going to do, it's easy for me to do this now while everything's open. I'm just going to attach it to the inside of the sleeve. So on the lining end. Okay, just give it a few back tacks. Okay, so now I'm going to pull this quite hard. And so I'm going to have to stitch this pretty accurately. It's only a thin elastic. Okay, just back tack it a few times. Okay, there we go. I'll just cut that off. And so now I'm going to stitch it again, this time with the lace. And just back tack it. Beautiful. Now I'm going to stitch the side seams and the sleeves all one go. Okay, we're on the home stretch. I'll just take the pins out for the skirt. Alright, so now I'm just going to overlock the hem. So now I'm going to stitch 1.5 centimeters for the hem. Okay, so now I'm just going to spread myself on the table a bit, and I will place the lace onto the skirt. There we go. This is looking incredible. This lace has turned out better than I thought. Heap of pins. It's going to make my life so much easier. Just going to take a couple of beads out here, which are in my way. Okay, so now I'll just stitch around that, like I did for the sleeves and for the bodice. Okay, so this is looking fantastic. And so I've ironed the bodice down, in particular the sleeves. So I've got a special little tool that I made when I did my dressmaking course, which is like a cushion, and I slipped it into the sleeve, opening up the seam allowance, and then ironing that down just to make it sit properly. Now the next stage is basically to sew the skirt to the bodice, and the only way we can do that is by gathering the waist. Now this is twice the size, as I said before, so what I'm going to do is run 2 lots of stitching, 1 centimeter and 2 centimeter away from the edge, and I'm going to use the widest stitch I can, so I'll just change that to number 5. Now you don't back tack here. Okay, so that's the first row. Now I'll do the next one at 2 centimeters. All right, so I'll just cut them off. Okay, so now what I've done is just basically got the 2 top stitches. I'll hold them equal, put the same amount of pressure on them. Okay, so all I do now is just slide my fingers through and pull that thread through until we're around the same size as that bodice waist. So generally when I'm sewing, gathering together, I leave a little bit of flat spot just on the ends because it's going to be a lot easier to sew. Okay, so now what I do is just even out the gathering to make it look equal. Try to balance it out best you can. You won't get this perfect, but just try. And that's actually looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So you can just see here, there's no gathering just on the end. Probably the first, I'd say 3 centimeters. Remembering 1.5 of that will be zipper. So when I fold that over, you want that zipper to sit on nicely. Okay, so now right side to right side. And so this is the bottom of the bodice on the back. And just place the back section here. I'll just put a pin in. Once again, 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. We will back tack this time. I'm going to change the stitch size back to what I had before, which is roughly 2.4. So we do basically just stitch it together. And you can sort of even out your gathering while you're doing this as well. If it looks a bit uneven, you can fix it at this point. So just make sure your lace is sitting on the bodice properly. You don't want it to overlap. And because this fabric frays a lot, just pull that fray through just like that. So it's going the right direction. This is going really well. So now we can just see how it matches up to the end. Now I'm a little bit too long, so that is better. Yep, almost there. I'll just now even out so I can just have a bit more length. So the skirt was a little bit too gathered, and now it's fine. All right. Okay, it's looking good. Continually readjusting. Okay. Final adjustment now. So you can see here, that comes right up to it. Spot on. It's looking really good. Okay. Just finish it off right. Now try to finish precisely at the right 1.5 width. If you started at 1.5, it's going to be really crucial at this point. So that's done. And let's see how this looks like. Woohoo! That is beautiful. Very happy with that. Okay, we're not finished this yet. What we need to do, that long thread that we started with, you've got to be very gentle and you've got to slowly pull that through so we can take it back out. And there we go. That's all done. Now we need to overlock the waist, and once we overlock the waist, then we're going to overlock the side seams, and then that way we can put the zipper in. All right, so now I've overlocked the ends. Now I'm going to turn this inside out. Now I'm going to put this zipper on the most easiest way you can do it. The side seams matched perfectly. I'm very happy with that. What I'm going to do now is put a pin up the top. I want this pretty straight. And what I'm going to do is stitch down 1.5 centimeters down 20 centimeters. So this is the zipper I'm going to use. So the back bodice length from the neck to the waist is 14 centimeters, which allowed more room so you could put the dress over the baby's head. I'm just going to change the setting again, stitch length to 5. And I'm going to put a marker here at 20 centimeters. And now I'm going to go down just past 20 centimeters. I want to miss this little metal bit just here. So I just go just marginally past. So when I stitch it, I'll stitch it at the widest width I can. So this is just a holding stitch until I put the zipper on. All right, again, I'm not going to back tack. So now I'm coming to the 20 centimeter or just over 20 centimeter pin mark. I'm going to go to that pin, take the pin out. Now it's really important. Now I'm going to change the stitching back to 2.4 and I'm going to back tack. Okay, so this is just the stitching of the rest of the back. I'm going to do a couple of back tacks. Okay, there we go. And then I just stitch the length. That married up beautifully. The hem is perfect. All right. Just make sure your lace is sitting properly. Beautiful. And now to the bottom of the lace. And again, that marries up perfectly. All right. Back tack it. All right, that's done. So now that's just a temporary stitching, as I said at the top. Okay, so now the next step. This is going to be a little bit tricky because there's only a very small neckline here. All right, so now I'll just change the foot to a zipper foot. So I'll sit the foot in using the left side of the foot. Okay, so now with the zipper, you pull this flap down just on a slight angle. You'll have a little bit of fabric coming out on the side. That's normal. And you just place that down. I'm going to change the stitching now to number 3. Okay. Again, a little bit of back tack. Now, remembering that there's a whole heap of fabric under here, so with my hand underneath here, I'm pulling the neckline down so I don't stitch into the neckline. This is a little bit tricky. I have made it a bit difficult for myself, but so the zipper, this section of the zipper sits right on the seam. All right, so you can't see what I'm doing here, but I am actually pulling the neckline back to give myself more room to stitch that down. Just keep adjusting myself so I don't stitch that neck in. As I said, it's a little tricky, but I find this way is the most accurate to put a zipper on. Just going to go past that metal bit on the base of the zipper. I'm going to turn, I've lifted my foot up, turning the feet around, making sure they do not stitch the neckline. The lace is sitting correctly. The lace will move, so be careful of that. I'm just going to come to the other side of the zipper. There it is there. Now we'll come back. Once again, I'm sorry I can't show you this clearer. Okay, so the neck is just pushed out of the way, so I definitely won't stitch it. And now because I'm going the opposite direction, I'm not going down, it should run pretty easily now. So I'm just gonna run that through. Okay, now we're coming back to the section where the zipper needs to have that little lip pushed through. I'm gonna push that in. All right, a little bit tricky on the last bit, a little bit tricky. So we'll try to get that right. Okay, and just pull everything through. I'm gonna keep that needle down. Okay, that is matched up beautifully. It's sitting perfect on the top here. Okay, so now with my unpicker, I'm just gonna unpick that stitching, opening up the zipper. I'm gonna be careful not to cut the lace. Just open it up all the way. So now that's plenty of room to get the baby through. Okay, it's done beautifully. Look at that. Done. So easy to put zippers on when you do it this way. Okay, so that's done. Looks fantastic. I'm so happy with that. And I'm sure my son and daughter-in-law are gonna love it. But my granddaughter will love it even more. After 3.5 hours, the dress is now complete, and it took roughly just over half an hour to make the patterns. It took just under half an hour to cut the fabric out, and it took a roundabout on and off 2.5 hours to sew the dress. And so I'm very pleased with it. And so it looks very similar to the illustration. Now the only difference is that I did make the dress longer. So I made the dress the same length as the illustration, but I made the lace go past the feet. So now that's going to look fantastic. Now one thing with the zipper, now I did curl the zipper in as I showed when I was stitching it in. You can either put the flap inside or outside. Now I didn't want to irritate the baby's back, so I made it go on the inside, but you can go either way. And I was a little skeptical with the lace, whether it would work or not, because it wasn't what I really wanted originally, but that looks fantastic. I'm actually really happy with that. And I'd like to thank the guys once again from AW Fabrics in St. Mary's. But I'd also like to mention Spotlight, which is where I buy most of my fabrics from, and they have branches everywhere. And I will put a link for them and AW Fabrics in the descriptions below. And I'll also put a link for the last video I made, just in case you're interested. So now we're ready for the baptismal day, and I'm really looking forward to see how this looks like on our granddaughter. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any comments at all, please leave them below and I will get back to you. And I'd ask you, please consider to subscribe, hit the like button and share this video, and there's many more to come. Thanks guys.